you able to hear me now?
I'm able to hear you now. Yeah, how are you?
Okay. Good, good, good. Just have to switch my settings from Zoom settings to team settings.
Okay,
So
okay. Would you prefer that we call you Dr. Boysen tonight or Guy, or how would you like to be addressed?
I'm comfortable with both. So that is
Okay,
fine either way.
okay. Well, let me start off. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. And I know you were on here a year ago and really enjoyed it. I was just telling everybody how your article is a very good example of sort of what this class is about. And that is taking something that looks like a good idea, seems like a good idea, well motivated, um, but somehow people take that and they don't stay in their own lane. And instead of sort of promoting that within the limits of what they should be promoting it, they take it and say, hey, this could work for everything, every type of learner, every scenario, and so on. And once they did that, it started to smell a lot like learning styles. Yeah. So, how'd you get into this? And before you answer, I noticed that your university, McKendree, you have you have a group or you have a platform where more folks than just you do some of this debunking stuff, right? Is that sort of encouraged at your university to go out there and ruin the lives of hardworking researchers who do bunk science?
I actually am not entirely certain what arm of McKendree or faculty member you're referring to, but we definitely we try to educate critical thinkers, and we appreciate critical thinkers at McKendree to be sure. Um, so yeah, if you have any hints as to who you're referring to, I'm happy to
I'll
chime in.
send you
But
the link. I'll send you
okay.
the link later. It was one of your things that you had sort of maybe it was a little blog thing or something,
Oh,
but
okay.
it showed that like other
Oh, yeah,
people
yeah.
were doing it too.
It might also be I teach an intro to psychology course that's an honors section, and so we look at I consider it sort of a classic book, 50 popular myths of psychology, and I have their honors students, so I have them actually write blog posts where they pick
Oh,
one of
okay.
those myths and write about
Okay.
them. So it's possible that that's where that came up, but
Awesome.
the kind of the to get back to your question, the story is actually perfectly aligned with your introduction because my introduction to UDL was the book literally entitled Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, which is sort of written for a college educator audience. And I read that because I heard so much about UDL during the pandemic. And that book was a very kind of popular introduction designed specifically for college teachers. And I have a very distinct memory of sitting in the sun in the summer, reading that on my deck, thinking about how I could incorporate some of these things into my courses in the fall because I was going to be teaching in a new hybrid way that I was not used to because of the pandemic, and really, really liking and even loving some of the things that were in that book. And then I set it aside for a while and went back to look at the references and was kind of shocked to see that if you scratch the surface of the references, there was essentially nothing there. And so I followed up and I've since looked at the references for the organization cast in a lot more detail. And initially wrote the article kind of when you take away the science, it does become very similar to learning styles when you realize that the science that they claim is behind it, at least the cast organization, doesn't back it up.
And I would imagine that the CAST organization, upon seeing a few of your publications, has welcomed you to come and speak at their events and to just kind of clear things up and set the record straight, correct?
Well, I would say it's been more of a deafening silence. I don't not aware of any. I'm not aware that they are aware of me. I have to imagine that someone has brought my work to their attention, and I did actually notice. I've got no inside information that since my most recent publication that analyzed some of, and I'm not the only person who's done this, there's another author who's done this, looking at their reference list and looking at it and kind of separating the articles that were empirical from those that were more just like expert opinion, that they have changed their website to put everything together to make it so that you can't distinguish just by looking at it how many of them are actually just opinion or theory pieces versus direct tests of things related to something allegedly related to UDL. So I have not heard from them, and I would be curious to know what their reaction is, frankly.
Well, we talked about this in the previous hour before you joined us, and one of the things we're kind of amazed by, and we were using the learning styles as an example. We talked about how pervasive it is in K-12 education and in higher education. Just about any university website you go to, if you'll do a search using their search engine on the website and put in quotes learning style, a lot of stuff will pop up. I would imagine even at McKendree in terms of the library. If you have a Center for Teaching and Learning or something like that, there'll be a lot of that there. It permeates the K-12 testing arena in terms of tests that we give persons who want to be licensed as K-12 teachers. We ask them questions about learning styles,
Mhm.
and the question was, well, how does this stuff persist? We talked about the notion of zombie concepts, how they're slain by like articles like yours, like, yeah, this is pretty convincing evidence. Why doesn't that have an effect on anybody and any change in behavior? Is everyone out there doing the ostrich head in the sand thing, especially those folks at CAST? Are they just not wanting to hear and see this stuff so that their life can go on? Why can't we reasonably affect change in the society, especially when it comes to things at the higher education level?
Well, I think there's probably two different answers to that. I don't have a lot of insight into CAS, but I do think that they have a little bit of a I guess I'll say a conflict of interest, and that a lot of their investment goes into promoting UDL and their model of UDL and selling the product of workshops, books. You can go on and get certified in UDL. And so I think the money that might be spent on a few, for lack of a better term, clinical trials where they experimentally test some of their claims, just goes into promoting UDL. Yeah, so I think that's part of the issue with CAST. In terms of learning styles, that's a really great question. It's been, I don't know, since 2009 when kind of the biggest and most impactful debunking article came out, and every single I see the comment sounds like a cult. It really does sound, in some ways, the way that they promote themselves is extremely cultish. They're trying to change the world, and it's doesn't sound like a scientific organization in a lot of ways. But the learning styles, so it's been forever since we've kind of known pretty definitively, and there's been meta-analyses since these that have looked at it and reviews. So the evidence is not accumulated for learning styles, but yet when I talk about it in my intro to psych class, we kind of start the semester talking about what's true and not true about facts in psychology. Every single hand goes up when I ask students how many of you learned at some point that you have a learning style. So it's I think, and also my education students are some of the ones who have the firmest belief that there are learning styles. So I think that it's still just sort of ingrained in a lot of the people who are in charge of education, both in the field and also I know that some people who are in education departments are still teaching it. And I think some of it also there's a little bit of a telephone game because people hear about um, perhaps learning disabilities and think that, oh, if something like dyslexia exists or ADHD exists, then those people have their own learning style, which is not really the idea that is talked about with learning styles. So I did see a hand go up somewhere. I'm not sure if I'm
Yeah,
supposed to field questions
Cassidy,
or.
Cassidy, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question has to go with what we're talking about, where the responsibility lies then to, I guess, solve this or to bring forth the information or to do the more rigorous research to prove that this is wrong. So like you mentioned, CAS has conflicting or conflict of interest. So if they're not going to do it, then who will? And how does that information get disseminated? Like who's responsible for that?
Yeah,
Or
I'll
what's the
point the
solution?
fingers directly at you, right? So it's all the good people that are getting advanced degrees in education, I think, are the people who are have the best possible you know motive to do it, and then also perhaps the best training to do it, and also perhaps the best resources to do it because you all have connections to people who are in the field doing these things. And I just don't think, I think psychologists could take some of the blame as well, but I just don't think that it is permeated into psychology enough where enough people would be interested to try it out and experimentally test it. And I've had very different reactions from psychologists who've heard about this work. One of the initial reviews for the article you read was like, what is going on? How is this even out there if this is the truth? And they had never heard of UDL, but they certainly had known about learning styles. And then I also have heard from colleagues who had people in their department go into their office and point to the article and say, is this guy serious? He can't possibly be serious saying this about UDL. So people have very, different opinions on it. But I think if you actually look at the evidence, it's not there to support it. So yeah, so I think responsibility, I say it would primarily have to fall on educators and especially people who have advanced degrees in education and teach an education department who have scholarships that they should be doing. This seems like the ideal kind of scholarship that you might do is to actually look at the effectiveness of interventions that you're doing and claiming are effective. And I'm not going to let Cass get off they're raking in money, and it would take just a very small look at how many people they have employed on their website. It would take, not very much of their budget, I would assume, to give a grant to test even just a small part of this, and it would not be difficult at all. And in psychology, in the teaching of psychology realm, where I sort of house my professional identity, we do this all day, every day. We've got multiple journals devoted to this type of research. So I think uh, EdPsych and CAS can do it too.
Well,
Good. Thank you for your
speaking of,
question.
yeah, speaking of, like learning styles and UDL being in the realm of education, and that's kind of our responsibility to stamp that out since it's in our backyard. We were talking earlier about the Myers-Briggs type indicator test. That's almost kind of considered in the realm of psychology, right? Because I would imagine right now, as we speak, there's hundreds of intro psychology undergraduate courses being taught across the United States. I would bet that hundreds of them are giving the Myers-Briggs test as part of the curriculum of that class, letting students then see what type they are and talk about that and so on, sort of like a horoscope almost. And
Mhm.
the Myers-Briggs has been debunked in a very similar way, yet it continues to permeate. Is that a psychology domain? Is that you guys are now responsible for stamping out some of that stuff in terms of, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I would say that's an empirical question, how many intro to psych textbooks it is. And, I would say having taught a test and measures course, um, we definitely talked about the validity of the Myers-Briggs as an advanced psychology topic and definitely talked about the criticism of it. The same as we did, the Rorschach. And so there are definitely psychologists who, due to training or just whatever, have sort of fallen in love with some measures that don't have great predictive validity. I would say the Rorschach is, and the other projective tests are maybe those I guarantee are in every psych textbook. Maybe have important historical value, but maybe are not as important clinically as the kind of the fame that they're given. And so, yeah, psychology is not immune to its own kind of things we get stuck on. And I think there is some value to talk about things to let students see kind of how the field has advanced. So I can imagine teaching the Myers-Briggs next to the Big Five personality inventories and explaining why one is maybe better supported than the other. And that's the approach I took in tests and measures. So yeah, we're not immune either. That's for certainly
Very,
true.
very. I appreciate you gladly accepting that sort of jab at psychology there, right? Mary, you have a question. Go ahead.
I do. You demonstrate a lot of concern that UDL is resembling learning styles, and that the benefit of choice. But also wanted to kind of ask, because for me, it's one of the bigger concerns, since UDL is really big in ESL in my field, and that is the that they are starting to kind of distinguish essential skills from content. And so you can receive content however you want. You can demonstrate knowledge of the content area however you want. And essential skills, I think, should be embedded within that, whereas UDL seems to be separating them. And so do you consider that an issue in UDL or no?
Uh, I'll be honest, that's a really good point that I hadn't thought of before, because it does seem to mostly, if you look at like the CAS guidelines, it's kind of like if you have students who need to learn facts and they're reading a textbook and then they're reciting those facts back somehow, here's a ways that you can make it accessible to everyone. And that seems to be kind of the assumption on what's happening there. And you don't see a ton of the there's sort of an assumption in there that the way that people are sort of expressing knowledge, and that they're learning things, needs to inherently be flexible. But if you're teaching oral communication, well, then there's oral communication. That's all there is. So I do think that could be an additional limitation to UDL, but I hadn't thought about that in particular in the past. So that is a really interesting idea.
Guy, I wanted to ask you a question because you're similar to me in the sense that you probably started your career as a professor in psychology, and you thought, well, my main job is to do empirical studies and publish in journals and so on. And at some point, you got lured into this sort of myth busting thing, right? How has that publishing experience been different than your normal, like, let's do some, for lack of a better word, safe publications where we do some empirical studies or do a review or something like that, where it's much less controversial and you might not have a huge organization, thinking about how can we eliminate Dr. Boysen, right? How has that changed? Have you experienced anything different going down that trail?
Well, I haven't heard anything about cast assassins. That makes me a little bit worried that they've got, people out looking for me. I don't think that's true, but that's an interesting concept. Maybe I'll be dreaming about that tonight. So I would say the biggest issue, and this is true, if you're planning to publish anything anywhere, is making sure that before you start writing up your project, and maybe even when you're planning the project itself, that you have an outlet in mind, a specific journal or a specific conference or whatever it is. Because what that allows you to do is make sure that the audience that's going to be reviewing it and deciding whether it's worthwhile, actually is going to be receptive to it. And so the initial paper that I wrote, that was the kind of the learning styles UDL one. I knew that there was a specific article type in that journal that was about bringing other fields and sort of integrating them into psychology. So I thought, okay, this is a perfect way to get some of this education ideas that seem to be creeping into the UDL, seems to be creeping into higher ed. And then the subsequent papers on that I've done have been, I've made sure to send them specifically to journals that had published previous criticisms of UDL. So I have the luxury of being at an institution where they like that I publish, and that's, you have to do scholarship for tenure, but there's no ranking of the quality of journals, and I don't get points if it's at a certain level. It's just like, you're doing research, yay, congratulations. And so I'm able to kind of pick and choose the projects that I'm interested in and make sure I target those for places who are going to be open to it. And I really have been pretty lucky, even though I do things, some of my research has been about kind of contradictory ideas that people have been pretty open to it. And I think I've only ever had a couple papers uh, where I was really kind of shocked when they got rejected. I think because people didn't like the idea, not so much because the conclusions were wrong. And that's, having published dozens of papers, it's only happened a couple times through the years.
If you would have submitted the 2024 paper, the cross-fertilization update that you published in Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in Psychology, if you would have submitted that to a special education journal, or especially a journal read simply by special education teachers, my prediction would have been that you would have been met with much more resistance and quite possibly rejection, because you would be saying things that main audience probably didn't want to hear.
There is an interesting thing with UDL, I think, that I have not explicitly, I try to say this in the articles, that I haven't explicitly tried to criticize them in terms of special education. And I think part of the reason is because some of the stuff is just like a true fact, right? So if you're doing special education and you're working with students with vision impairment, then the UDL suggestion that you be able to have screen readers and adjust the size of the font, well, of course you want to be able to do that. But that being said, even in the special education realm, the amount of evidence that it's helping those students meet learning goals that they wouldn't otherwise achieve when is just as absent as anything else. But I do think that there is kind of two different sections. There's the like it's for everyone, like you started our conversation, versus the more of like accommodations for disabilities. I think those are kind of two different questions. But I will definitely think about that if I continue to do EDL research to it. But maybe they're the
Well,
ones that need to hear it. Maybe we
it's
point the finger at them.
It's all getting back to that staying in your lane versus swerving out of your lane, right? And getting more dangerous as you swerve out of the lane. Yeah, I've had so many experiences where I've tried to publish similar things to what you've done here, and I've done a number of those over the course of my career, and it probably says something about my personality much more than the Myers-Briggs would, that I enjoy sort of challenging and challenging the status quo and mixing things up and causing people to rethink and question and things like that. And some papers I've had a really tough time finding outlets for them, because the people who review them, I don't think are evaluating the evidence and whether it's sound and whether it's objective or whatever. They just simply didn't like the overall message. And that goes back to, what we were talking about earlier. It's tough to affect change when people don't like the message and they stick their head in the sand so they don't have to hear the message. And I don't know whether we're going to see any huge policy changes based on your efforts to sort of expose UDL and kind of spread some caution here and a call for more empirical research and things like that. I don't know how many people are going to take up the charge there and follow you and do that, or if they're just going to say like, wow, that guy is really upset about something. What's his deal, right?
Yeah, and part of the maybe challenge is going to be that UDL is, or I guess universal design, not CAS UDL specifically, is literally baked into federal law. And so, yeah, if you want to hear some or read some kind of disheartening things, I haven't heard his name pronounced. I think it's a he. Eddie Byrne has written a couple articles, DL Eddie Byrne, about kind of the history and the background of CAST and UDL specifically, and talks about how It talked like federal law literally says that UDL is like a scientifically validated form of education, and Eddie Byrne basically says they did that because the lobbyists gave them a kind of a made up bunch of evidence and convinced them on the effectiveness of it when that evidence didn't exist. And along the same lines, this organization CAST has this brain model. Eddie Byrne talks about how the brain model existed before they started compiling evidence to support it, and how the CAST organization in UDL existed before they created this long list of 1,500 references that support UDL. Well, UDL existed before that reference list, so it's really hard when it's so ingrained at every level, at the institutional level, at the federal level. It's all over the place.
Well, Guy, I want to be respectful of your time. I really appreciate you taking the time in your evening to join us and talk about this stuff. And like I said, this is one of my favorite classes in the sense that love the reading, love the topic, and I think your approach just really sort of personifies how we need to question things in a scientific society. We should be questioning. We should be skeptical. We should be saying, "Hey, here's a challenge. If you'd like to address this, how about challenging it with data?" As opposed to just saying you don't like it, that you don't like what I said. You have data that backs up what you're doing here. So really like it, and thank you so much for joining us and taking the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I could talk about this all night. It's great fun.
Appreciate what you do, and I probably said this a year ago. Maybe I'll run into you at a conference or something sometime in the future. So
Sounds great. Good luck,
yeah,
everybody.
have a good evening. Take care.
You too.